In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now, yes, I've been away on holiday. And yes, I've been to my favorite city in the world, Rome. There is a church in Rome, St. Bartholomew's. It's on an island in the Tiber. Worshippers had dwindled, but rather than shut it, the Bishop of Rome, that would be the Pope, gave the church to a religious community to transform it into a shrine for remembering Christian martyrs of the 20th and the 21st century. And the people remembered there at that church are not just Catholics or Anglicans who often remember these things, but people of all denominations, from all the continents of the world, from very what we would consider ordinary people like ourselves, maybe, and then some very well-known figures as well. It's there to remind visitors that acts of courage and dedication which end in death are not just a thing of centuries past. These things happen now. You remember our friend Alistair MacNaughton, and almost up to the time of his death, he was translating a Russian theologian called Alexander Men, an important work. But I remember them because Alexander Men is remembered in this church because he was assassinated by Putin's regime. You wouldn't necessarily know this, but there's a church in Russia now dedicated to Alexander Men, and St. Anthony's, which has more candlesticks than it needs, sent a pair to that church when it was dedicated. But remembered in this church of St. Bartholomew in Rome are all sorts of people. People from churches in Iraq, Iran, Africa, the Americas, Europe. 9 members of a religious community in the Solomon Islands. About 15 years ago now, I think, were killed for trying to negotiate peace between 2 factions in the Solomon Islands, directly out of what they thought their faith was telling them to do. There are many remembered there connected with World War II in aiding those who had been targeted by the Nazis. It remembers 2 priests killed at the altar while they were leading a Eucharist. But most, if any of their names, you won't immediately recognize. But they are some of the saints of today. Now, that's all a bit sobering. Not all saints are martyrs, of course. In fact, most of them are not. And we shouldn't dwell on the dangers of those who give their lives for a faith in Jesus Christ. But their witness should inspire us and help us to see where we sit as the saints of God. This All Saints' Day is our day in communion with all those who have gone before us, all those who have influenced our lives for good, living their faith boldly and inspiring us to, then we are the current saints of God. So the question, obviously, is how do we live our lives boldly in faith? We have a curious gospel this morning for All Saints' Day. It's the scene of Jesus' friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, good friends of Jesus, and they're grieving because Lazarus has just died. They are broken with grief, perplexed, and in this scene that we've read, perhaps even angry at Jesus for not being there when Lazarus was dying. It's the confusion of emotions, of course, that we all know when someone dies. And Jesus himself is caught up in this grief. And Jesus himself weeps. This was his friend, Lazarus. Jesus, not one often seen to be out of control emotionally in any way. What does this mean that he too weeps? Part of it surely is that Lazarus has touched his life. Lazarus is worth grieving and crying for. As it recalls also that song, perhaps, which reads, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted." God is with us, and God values each of us. So much so that God would weep. But Jesus weeping at the tomb is probably as impressive as what happens afterwards, which is Lazarus is raised from the dead. Come out of the tomb. And Lazarus is back with them. But this scene shows us that grief and difficulty in life is also a part of the stuff of God. And Jesus does not take it lightly. And I think sometimes in our assurance, we may rush too quickly and glibly to speaking of resurrection life. Sometimes it takes a while to get there. And this follows the theme of all of those readings we had this morning, actually. Yes, we are people of resurrection, but we must live an authentic life which accompanies those who are in difficulty. And we need to be with them in that difficulty, as we hope they will be with us when we are at those low times in difficulty and grief. But as Christians, we do this with the knowledge of the resurrection, as people of hope. Hope that new life will emerge, and we are bearers of that hope. We read in the Book of Wisdom, as we did today, in the eyes of the foolish, they seem to have died. Their death was a disaster. But their witness will shine forth. And this is a message of All Saints' Day. God watches over his elect. And then in the reading of Revelation, once again, the grief and the trials are not dismissed. They're a part of life. But eventually, God wipes all of that away. Death will be no more. Crying and pain are no more. Christ has made all things new. So this is a reality that God blesses the saints of God in the lives that they have lived. That life comes out of death. It is the stuff of our lives. God is God of life, and Jesus proves this. And those giants of our faith give us good examples of courage, no matter what the threats are, always hoping that new life emerges, even if they are killed for the faith in the process. So, we ask, what makes a theologian in Russia speak out for Jesus, regardless of what Putin threatens? What makes a group of innocent but courageous Melanesians go into the jungle and dare to negotiate for peace with only the resources and the knowledge that Jesus proclaims peace, so we must? What makes a shy, bookish academic like Archbishop Oscar Romero, which is a name you may know, become the champion of the poor in El Salvador and be shot dead at the altar? Those shooting him were probably thinking, oh, this will make his faith look so foolish. All we have to do is gun him down. Well, 30 years later, he's canonized as a saint. Books and films and everything are written about him. He has become a witness to the faith through that single act. Little did they know, who are the foolish ones? Many of those mentioned, those commemorated at that church in Rome, they led joyful lives, very full lives. And that's the thing you need to hang on to. Lives overflowing with God's Spirit. Their deaths were a sign that they would not give up that joy. They would not give up that fullness of life. So we're not glorifying their death. We're glorifying the life that they led. But it did lead them to that. They were not looking to be killed. They were living out their Christian vocation to the full, in joy and in peace with God. Now, we may think we're very distant from those kinds of situations. But no doubt, each of us has seen God act in our lives, bringing life out of situations that are situations of death, really. Where have we accompanied those who are in difficulty, those who grieve, or had experiences ourselves, and then seen, perhaps very slowly sometimes, new life emerging? This is of God. This is God's way. This is God acting as God has acted through the ages. And so, Jesus wants us to take note of that in our own lives and to share that story. That very simple story of how we have seen life emerge, how we have seen the resurrection. That's our saintly task and love. It is tragic, of course, when people are in situations that are just horrendous, sink into despair, and do not comprehend anything beyond that. We know, hopefully, differently as the saints of God. And we must share that experience with those in despair and remind ourselves of it as well sometimes. That is our saintly task. So we give thanks for the great saints, the giants of our faith who have inspired us, but never forget that we are the current saints and we have some work to do and some stories to share.